My husband changed completely after his business became successful. He didn't even bother hiding that he was cheating on me with another woman. When I finally confronted him, he just laughed at me and said, "You're worthless, you don't earn a thing. Be grateful I'm supporting you." I told him I'd get a job, but he just laughed again and told me to do whatever I wanted. So, I found a job at his parent company and started planning my revenge. My name is Karen. I'm 34 years old and was a homemaker. My husband, Michael, is 36 and owns a printing company. We first met at the same company years ago. I worked in the illustration department, and he was in sales. We fell in love and got married when I was 26. Once we were settled, Michael quit his job and asked me about starting his own business. I wasn't sure, so we talked with Bob, a CEO we knew from our old job who had become our friend and business partner. Bob invested in the business, and I was so grateful for his support. With his help, Michael and I started running the new company together. In the beginning, we struggled in a tiny apartment, but when the company grew, we were able to move into a high-rise condo. Then Michael asked me to stop working and be a homemaker instead. "I'll hire someone else for the illustrations," he said. "I want you to support me from home." I agreed, though I was sad to leave my illustration work. Bob was also disappointed but told me he'd support me if I ever wanted to get back into it. I became a homemaker and started posting my illustrations on Instagram as a hobby, which gave me a lot of happiness. Meanwhile, Michael's business kept growing, and so did our lifestyle. He bought a new car and custom-made suits, which I thought were a bit much, but I figured it was important for him as the company's owner. Even though he was busy, Michael always came home for dinner. It was something we promised to keep for just the two of us. Over dinner, he would usually tell me about his business plans, and I was happy to support his dreams. I thought things would always be like this. But as the company grew, Michael started acting differently. He stopped talking to me about the business during dinner. When I asked how things were going, he'd just say, "It's fine," without any enthusiasm. When I pressed him to share more, he snapped, "You wouldn't understand. You're always at home, you don't know anything about this." I was shocked to hear him say that, but I tried to convince myself he was just tired. That night, he finished his meal in silence and went straight to his room. This continued, and then he started having dinner out more often, saying it was for work. I'd still wait for him, skipping my own dinner, but he wouldn't come back until much later. Lately, my husband wouldn't even send an excuse when he didn't come home for dinner. When I brought it up, he'd just yell at me. He seemed like a completely different person, and I felt like nothing more than a servant to him. I often found myself in tears, remembering the tough times we went through together to build his business. Now, I felt like I was even lower than his employees. I didn't enjoy housework, but I took it on to support my husband's dream. I'd wanted to keep working as an illustrator, but I gave that up to help him. Any appreciation he once had for my support was now completely gone. To relieve my stress, I would lose myself in my illustrations whenever he was out. Posting them online was my only escape, and I gained more followers. Seeing positive comments lifted my spirits. Among them, I even noticed Bob had left a comment saying, "I hope we can work together again someday." That message kept me going. After we stopped having dinner together, a growing distance came between my husband and me. Eventually, I started to suspect there was another woman. One day, I found a hint of perfume on his jacket, a scent I knew he'd never wear. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged and smirked, saying it probably came from an acquaintance. He acted as if being caught didn't matter at all. For the first time, my sadness turned into anger. I was tired of feeling mocked and left alone at home, doing nothing but housework. The fear of being left behind by the world grew each day, and my friends would only say they were jealous of me when I tried to talk about it. My parents brushed it off as a luxury problem. I felt completely alone in dealing with it. Then one day, my husband came home drunk. I helped him to bed, and that's when I noticed a lipstick mark on his shirt. There was no way he'd come home with a lipstick mark on his shirt by accident. It felt like a challenge from the other woman. Finally, I had proof that he was cheating. The next day, I showed him the shirt and confronted him. "Where were you last night? And what's this lipstick mark?" I asked. He looked at the mark, surprised, but stayed calm. "I was at a bar with friends. It must have happened then." "But for that to happen, you'd have to take off your jacket. Didn't you notice?" I pressed. "I don't remember," he replied, then suddenly stood up and slapped me. I fell back, feeling a hot sting on my cheek, shocked and unable to believe what had just happened. "When will you understand?" he said angrily. "Who do you think is providing for us?" He left the room, and I sat there crying. Watching him go, the reality hit me hard. My husband had changed. He no longer loved me. From then on, he became even more aggressive. If he didn't like a meal I'd made, he'd throw the plate on the floor. "This tastes awful. Do you even know what I like? If you want to stay my wife, improve your cooking," he'd say, getting up to leave. "I'll eat out if this is what you're making. Bad food affects my work." I tried to stop him. "Wait, I want to cook what you like, but you never come home or talk to me. How can I make anything good if I don't know what you want?" He just clicked his tongue in irritation. "Then let's get a divorce. I don't need you, I can live without you, but you can't live without me, can you?" He looked at me with a smirk. "You're worthless, a parasite who doesn't earn a cent." Something inside me snapped. I realized then that the caring, loving husband I once knew was gone. This man would never change. "Then I'll get a job," I said firmly. "What?" My husband looked at me, surprised. "I'll become financially independent too," I replied. He burst out laughing, clutching his stomach. "Who would hire someone as powerless as you?" he scoffed. I held back my anger, knowing I had to stay calm. Getting upset would only lead to more abuse. Since I couldn't fight him physically, I'd have to find another way to stand up for myself. "Fine, do as you please," he said, "but don't slack on the housework. I won't accept you neglecting it just because you're making a few pennies." With that, he left the house. Right away, I began planning. I hired a detective to gather proof of my husband's cheating, and soon I had plenty of photos, images of him with flashy women, drinking and going into hotels with them. It wasn't just one woman either, he was using his money to impress and date different women. Seeing the photos and reading the detective's report, I didn't feel anger or sadness anymore. Instead, I felt relieved that his bold behavior made it easy to gather evidence. 1 week later, I went to a restaurant on the top floor of a hotel to meet with Bob. I wore the nicest clothes I could find, though I still felt underdressed compared to the other customers. I walked to the reserved table, where Bob was already seated. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," I said. Bob smiled and waved me over. "Not at all, Karen. I've been looking forward to seeing you. Waiting isn't a problem." Bob had been a big supporter of ours when my husband and I started his company, and he was now the president of my husband's parent company. "Thank you so much for helping us when we went independent," I said. Bob nodded. "I was surprised when you both decided to go independent, but since we had worked together for a long time, supporting you was no trouble at all. The company seems to be doing well, thanks to you." His face turned serious. "But today, we're here because you accepted my invitation, right?" he asked, smiling at me warmly. "Yes," I replied, straightening up. Bob had always appreciated my illustrations, and he'd funded the business partly because I was involved. He was also the only one who had advised me against giving up my career to become a homemaker. Bob and I had lost touch over the years, but he found me on social media and left a comment on my posts. We started chatting through emails and texts. "You've always understood my illustrations, haven't you?" I said to him once. "I'm so glad you're still drawing, I'm a fan of your work," he replied. Bob even offered to hire me as an illustrator, though I declined because of my household duties. Still, he kept reaching out, encouraging me to join him. A week ago, after another difficult conversation with my husband, I finally decided to accept Bob's offer. During our meeting, Bob hesitated, then looked at me seriously. "I hate to bring this up, but Michael's company has a really bad reputation," he said. "Really?" I was shocked. Michael had always made it sound like everything was going well. Bob explained, "Since the business started growing, quality has dropped, deadlines are missed, and mistakes keep happening. Worse, Michael doesn't seem to care. Is this widely known?" I asked, surprised. "Yes. As his company grew, people noticed, but now it's the wrong kind of attention. There are even rumors that he's involved with some questionable people." Hearing this, I realized I didn't know my husband as well as I thought. Then Bob changed the subject, smiling to lift the mood. "Anyway, from now on, you'll be doing illustrations for us. No need to outsource, that's a huge plus for our company. And don't worry, we'll make sure it doesn't interfere with your family life," he reassured me. So, I started working for Bob, illustrating remotely from home. I could balance my work with household chores, and it felt amazing to draw for a living again. I had loved doing it as a hobby, but working on commissioned projects was fulfilling in a whole new way. While I was happy, there were times when household responsibilities got in the way, and I found myself wishing I could work freely, without interruptions. But thankfully, my income grew, and I realized that I could support myself if I ever needed to. One day, while I was working, I heard the door slam loudly. I went to see what was going on and found my husband storming toward me, his eyes full of rage. "You traitor," he shouted. At first, I couldn't understand why he was so angry. "I never thought my own wife would take my clients," he fumed. Then I realized, my recent work must have been cutting into his business. Since I started working with Bob, he'd introduced me to other companies, many of which happened to be my husband's business partners. This was, in a way, my silent revenge for how he'd treated me. It must have felt humiliating for him, seeing me, the wife he'd looked down on, taking away his contracts. "You don't have the right to say anything to me," I replied calmly. "I'm just doing my job, just like you said I could." My husband's face grew angrier, but I didn't flinch. "Go ahead, hit me if you want," I said firmly. "But then I'll call the police." The mention of the police made him stop. "My company is failing because of you." "What are you trying to do to me?" he asked, frustrated. "That has nothing to do with me," I replied, walking to another room to grab the divorce papers. I handed them to him and said, "We're not husband and wife anymore." "Are you kidding? You're divorcing me because my company is struggling? You're nothing but a gold digger," he sneered. "I could have divorced you a long time ago, but I waited for the right time. Now I'm working, earning my own money, and don't need anything from you." "Wait," he pleaded, suddenly sounding desperate. "Let's talk about our company before we talk about divorce. We started it together, didn't we? You kicked me out of that company, remember? I have nothing to do with it now. But I'll make sure I get the compensation I deserve." He glared at me, biting his lip in frustration. "How greedy can you be? You're asking for money when you're the one asking for a divorce? Do you know how many times you hit me?" I asked quietly. "And how openly you cheated on me?" "I have all the proof I need for compensation." I showed him the photos that the detective had gathered. Seeing the evidence, my husband fell to his knees. "Please," he begged. "The company is already in trouble. I can't handle both a divorce and paying you compensation. I need your support. When the company started going downhill, everyone abandoned me except for you." I ignored his pleas. I left the house with only my work supplies and a change of clothes. The next time I returned was just to pick up the rest of my belongings after the divorce was finalized. By then, his company had lost all its clients, and he was spending his days begging others for help. Meanwhile, I started living on my own, happily making a living from my artwork. My illustrations became popular, and I grew quite successful. Now, I live a good life and always remember to keep my integrity, never letting myself forget my ex-husband as a lesson in what not to become.